Yes, please.
صباح الخير وأهلا وسهلا بكم في ثاني أيام مؤتمرنا.
Good morning and welcome to the second day of our conference. We would like to remind you that this conference is streamlined, and those who don't want to be photographed, we would like to ask him or her to sit at the right side of this hall. We shall start with the keynote speech. وضح خنفر will be delivering
الأستاذ محمد كريشان المذيع بقناة الجزيرة الإخبارية.
part.
تفضل أستاذ محمد.
And Mr. Muhammad shall introduce the gentleman. Without any introductions, and we shall just ask Mr. Wadah Khamfar to talk to us over the course of 30 minutes, and then we will be asking him few questions, and his paper is entitled The Grand Narratives of Western Media in Covering the War on Gaza, Manifestations of Political and Ideological Domination. Good morning. As a matter of fact, I wasn't late, but I got lost. But anyway, in May 2024, Thomas Friedman wrote an article in New York Times, and he spoke about the understanding of the Middle East relying on the animal farm. And the article is very famous. How do you understand the Middle East? By way of the interpretation of the animal farm. And he thought, and here we're talking about the article that has been published 8 months following the 7th of October and during the genocide. He said that a dog-eating dog environment is being surfaced, and when you read such an article, you feel outraged, you feel angry. However, when you follow Thomas Friedman and what he's written over 30 years, and he was a correspondent in Tel Aviv and Beirut, and he has good relationships with a number of Arab governments. He is a liberal, and he's appreciated by numerous people. However, when he looks at this region, he is not different from the centers of powers in the interpretation of our region. Why? Because liberalism, or otherwise, if it is linked to the centers of power, would become a tool of hegemony, would be militarized, exploited, and hence the liberals in the school of thought do not differ much from the conservatives or the nationalists or others if they liaise with power. So the centers of power in the West look at the Middle East and the rest of the world as being a jungle, and those who live in such areas are species that are similar to human animals, as the former Israeli Defense Minister has said. So they can be dehumanized, and murder can be, and hence with impunity. These species are quasi-humans, but they are animals in essence. And this is nothing new, and this has nothing to do with the Arab world or Palestine or Gaza. This view has developed over centuries, over decades, especially as far as looking at our region and Africa, Latin America and Asia, where genocide took place, and hence what Israel has done in accordance with the Western political mentality and the centers of power is actually an extension to an ancient approach that has dehumanized the foe, not only the foe, but the other. And hence millions were murdered all across the world, their treasures were confiscated. All this was justified under the disguise of civilization versus barbarism. And here I'd like to say that what Israel has done during the last 2 years and before then, during the occupation of Palestine, expedites the demise of this school of thought or this system. How? When we've studied at universities, when we've studied philosophy and political sciences, we thought that the Renaissance of Europe was based on great philosophers who floated great ideas, the rule of law, equality, justice, freedom, and so on and so forth. However, when you revisit history outside the Western system, because I have indeed revisited history, I discovered that the Renaissance did not start with Kant or other philosophers, but these philosophers jumped on the bandwagon at a later stage following the Renaissance, because the Western kind of ascending power in 1494, Columbus went to Latin America and he discovered species and treasures, and later on the discoverers, between 2 brackets, discovered that land to confiscate the treasures thereby. In 1560, 200 tons of gold and 400 tons of silver annually used to be confiscated, and hence Europe became rich and had fleets and armies, and indeed was victorious over the Ottomans, because the Ottomans constituted a buffer zone between Europe and India and China, and then they arrived in China and India by way of the Portugals, and this had constituted a quantum leap 2 years after Columbus discovered America. So this cycle had started with amassing the treasures and then entrenching power, and then the philosophers came along and the art prospered and so on and so forth. This is very important because I think that the Western civilization in its essence, power and economy are 2 very important pillars, and hence the powerful is the successful, the important, the glorious, and the respectful, and the underdog is the barbarian, the one who belongs to the animal farm. The jungle can be decimated, can be recycled in order to become more civilized. And hence, this idea that is intrinsically linked with power has its manifestations in Palestine. However, during the last decades, when we studied media and applied media, we cling to the standards of the Western Hemisphere. Objectivity, the opinion, and the opinion of the other. And I think that the Western ideas and the standards were tolerant when power was in the hands of the West. The West is tolerant when it is the actor, the powerful. However, when it is when its power retreats, then the main ideas of tolerance will dissipate, and hence we saw during the last years with the retreat of the power of the West all across the world and the dislocation of the global system and the treasure heading towards the Orient, we've seen the West being reckless, being prickly, and as a matter of fact, the fig leaf has dissipated or fallen off. in politics and in the media. And then there was a counterattack that was vicious, unprecedented, and Israel expedited this. Why? Because the exclusiveness or the exceptionality of Israel ought to have been exceptionality only for Israel. But history teaches us that when you violate the valuable law, then violations in other kind of aspects will be easier. So if Israel has been exceptional and carried out genocide, decimated Gaza, and so on and so forth, why other kind of imaginary enemies can't have this status? So if you look at the official statements of the West during the last decades, I believe that what was special vis-a-vis Zionism and Israel and its practices against the Arabs and the Palestinians became an international usual trend. Today we are talking about Venezuela. It might be occupied. Why not? Because the US is powerful. This kind of propensity or trend has been entrenched in the West, but the moral kind of trend represented in the media and the other school of thoughts, as well as the cultural discourse related to the centers of power, this trend has become more extensive, more present, because the Zionism and Israel have been equipped with a right that violated the liberalism own rules emanating from Renaissance. And hence, if they were violated, then everything can be violated. If killing the Palestinians is feasible, then killing the immigrants and the refugees that were heading to Europe, they were called insects, animals, barbarians. They were portrayed as violators or sexually kind of abusers and so on and so forth. The official and the media statements concluded that. I think that Israel expedites the fall of what is being the fig leaf that covered the European civilization. I think the Western civilized cycle is about to end. This cycle, when its values are violated day in and day out, not at the hands of extremists, but at the hands of high-profile politicians, cultured people, and media personalities, and so on and so forth, and hence the value will be kind of dissociated away from the center of gravity and the center of Western civilization, because civilizations are based on morality, on values, and I think what Israel has done and is doing represents a manifestation of the demise of the Western cycle and expediting the fall of this Western civilization. This means that we'll be witnessing in the future more exposure in dealing with the rest of the world by the Western media, especially as far as the Muslims are concerned, because there is a new kind of counterattack against political Islam and Islam, as if Islam is the biggest danger and not Israel, following the Al-Aqsa flood. But I think that this will lead sooner or later to another attack on minorities, including the Jewish minorities in Europe, because the anti-kind of Jewish sentiment is a European one, and it was elbowed aside following the Second World War. However, refugees were targeted because they're refugees, and the migrants have been targeted because they are migrants. Because when you violate the sacrosanct, then you can as well violate other kind of issues. And hence, the world will go back to the pre-Second World War era. And hence, Israel will be not opposing the Muslims per se or the Arabs, but it will be opposing the Jews themselves, because it laid the ground for the monster to be alive again, and indeed anti-Jewish sentiment might be afoot. So this cycle will lead to the suffering not only of the Arabs and the Muslims because of Islamophobia, but also the different minorities, notably the Jews. And hence, I say that what takes place before our eyes ought to be studied as follows, and this is a positive sign. I've spoken about the negative aspects because the Western civilization had hinged on money, funds, and power, and the fig leaf, as a matter of fact, has fallen, and this is what I believe in. But there is something new that is surfacing. This deep failure of aligning values with reality had led to a yawning gap between the elite and the people. And this yawning gap is manifest in the streets of the West. The pro-Palestine supporters, the artists, the athletes, the ordinary people, and the yawning gap between the governing elite, the elite of money, power, and media, and the people, is expanding unprecedentedly. And hence, when you see the West, when you see the streets in the capitals of the West supporting Palestine, they don't support Gaza per se, but they support symbolism pertinent to the elite being traitors of their values, the value of justice through capitalism, vicious capitalism, also the value of equality when it comes to the environment, and the confiscation of treasures, also a treason when it comes to democracy itself, when the capital is or has the upper hand rather than the values. Also betrayal of equality when the right thinks of the left as an enemy and vice versa. And we see the non-existence of tolerance. As a matter of fact, when we witness attacks leveled against the migrants and the refugees and so on and so forth, so this set of values are non-existent. In addition to that, there is a deep economic failure, and here things will be different. A governing elite that wants to stay at the helm of power and preserve the status quo, and the people that believe that this elite has betrayed us. There's no prosperity, there is no paradise. The paradise is lost, and hence we have two Wests, and this is very important. The West has not become the center of conspiracy. We used to look at the West as powerful, as the West of the state, the West of power. However, we have the West of people, and hence we have two Wests. The West that is conniving, that is conspiring, indeed, and there is also a West that wants to support you because it wants to support itself. It wants to support the rest or the remaining values that has surfaced in the past. So I think that our situation is better than before, is value-wise, because indeed there is a chasm between the two Wests. Those who kind of exploited power and money and connived and conspired against us, and the people on the other hand. The people in the West and we who support Gaza are partners, and hence the media systems that were established were non-existent 2 decades ago. I've read a study just a few days ago. We have a billion account in the social media supporting Palestine, defending Palestine continuously. And on the other hand, the media machine has betrayed the values, and you have witnessed how the media outlets have betrayed Palestine, and as a matter of fact, in the past, they were kind of implicit in opposing Palestine, but now things are different. The media outlets in the West have indeed opposed the Palestinians kind of sullenly. Today, things are in the open, especially when it comes to the official media outlets. But the street has different platform, a different voice, and hence the official media is kind of dissipating, is dying out, not only because of Gaza, but because of the internal divisions. And there's another thing that has been revived, and the other kind of thing is decentralized. It cannot be hegemonized, even if they try. And even if slogans are different, but still, this is organic. This is, as a matter of fact, cannot be owned by multinational companies that have billions, or states that guide the journalists and the media personalities. It is the conscious of the world that is embedded in their hearts, and this is a quantum leap, a historic quantum leap in the media. The media that we know now is different than the media in the past, the official media. This is a new voice. We need to be present. We need to understand it correctly. And hence, the West is an ally to us in its dimension that relates to the streets, to the values, and it is a foe in its official kind of face, represented in the institutions and in the media, the official media. In conclusion, we are in the midst of this struggle. Why? Because the Palestinian cause has put the Arab world in the center, the epicenter of the world. What used to be imagined just a few years ago as nation states to have different systems, to say Tunisia first, or Jordan first, or Egypt first, and so on and so forth. It's been proven that this is impossible. Not only impossible morally and value-wise and so on and so forth, because we are Arabs and we have the same language and so on and so forth, but it is impossible because of the way the international system looks at us, because they look at us as a collective, a community, rather than being divided by borders that are kind of fake, that were imposed on us. But because they have the same policies. Israel doesn't differentiate between those who normalized and those who did not. And America deals with the rest of the world in a transactional world. And hence we need to redefine ourselves and redefine the West as being two Wests. And we must say to ourselves that what we, or what some of us used to think of as being away from being forced to Israel toward normalization, or perhaps seeking forgiveness from the West at the altar of providing sacrifices to Israel, is impossible. I think that the Al-Aqsa flood has changed, had turned the tables, and Israel has shown its true face, its true color, its true ferocity and viciousness and extremism, and the West has also shown its true color. So things are very clear before our eyes. What used to be an illusion has become a reality. What used to be an imaginary kind of issue has become a reality. And people do understand what took place, and this change is a core change. That means that our elite, the intellectual elite, the economic elite, and others must revisit their discourse. When we were kind of accommodated within the borders of the nation state, whereby we cling to our artificial identity, we lost greatly. Now we need to come back to our collective conscience. That doesn't mean that we need to go back to nationalism of the 60s or the ideology of a certain party here and there, but I'm talking about commonalities, our mutual interests, our collective identity, our collective culture. Without this, we will be failing. We need, as a matter of fact, to establish genuine renaissance in our part of the world. Otherwise, we'll be slaves of the Western civilization. If the nation state continues as it is, the more the ceiling of the US is lowered, then our discourse will be lowered, and then will be dissipating and will be eroding, and the institutions and the legitimacy of our part of the world will be kind of decaying. And hence, we as elites, we must shake off the previous contexts. We need to have a new discourse. We have a message. The media is nothing to do with a profession per se. It is a profession, yes, it is a valuable profession, but it is to do with a sacred message. If we betray our profession, then we'll be a failure as media personalities, and hence the Arabs in the past used to say the pioneer of a certain community ought not to be a liar. You need to abide by your community's values, and hence we are the forefront, we are the spearheads of the change, and hence we need to redefine our message. And lastly, I'd like to say that we are the sons of daughters of this nation. We have a splendid history. There's the new Middle East, as the West keeps saying. This goes back to Napoleon Bonaparte when he came to Egypt to formulate a new Middle East, and then it has been used every other year. We have heard the new Middle East time and time again during our lives, but this Orient wants to be kind of connected, and this region has a specific DNA, a specific cultural and socio kind of system. We have received all the prophets and the messengers in our land. So Thomas Friedman, the boastful man, cannot think of having a new Middle East because he thinks that we live in a jungle and they are animals and they need to go back to the zoo from the jungle and so on and so forth. This is the mentality of the West, but it has failed in Iraq, it has failed in Afghanistan, it will fail in Palestine as well, it has failed in Algeria following 150 years of colonization, because our civilization is entrenched, is established, well established, and we are the guardians of such change. We are responsible as Arabs and Muslims to liaise with those who support our values in the West, and we need to be trustworthy. We need to shoulder the responsibility of being spearheads, because I hear that some would come and fill the gap that the West leaves. China? Do you think that China can do that? But why China? Why we don't fill our own gap, our own vacuum? We have filled vacuums and vacuums over the last hundreds of years, over the last centuries. Not only our vacuum, but the vacuum of the world. We don't want to be a hegemon like the US. We don't believe in unjust globalization. We believe on the globalization that hinges on values. These are our brothers and sisters. We need to be the spearheads. We need not to wait for Russia, Europe, China, or India to fill in the vacuum. We don't fear the change. Change is good. we shall suffer, but we shall overcome this tragedy towards the shore of tranquility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waddah Khanfar. So he made the topic very interesting indeed by putting it in this larger context. So we're going to be having 15 minutes for discussion. So shall we start from the right or the left or the middle? The right, please. So the representatives of Al Jazeera are the last to take the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Waddah. Thank you for this analysis. At the outset, I introduce myself, Nadir Dagher. We cannot explain what is happening in the West. Nadir Dagher, welcome. I commend the analysis that you have given. We cannot explain the situation in the West in isolation of the materialistic explanation of the forces and what is happening in the West. And I would like to add something, and after that, I would like to pose a question. Solidarity with Palestine, particularly in Palestine, is not out of so this is due to the fact that there are different levels of the social fabric that are becoming poorer, and this is their slogan. It is not out of compassion or empathy that they are so showing solidarity with Palestine. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the US filled the vacuum, and even more than that. So what are the attributes of this regional project that you're talking about? And is this project with a nationalistic or religious kind of identity or trait? So we'll take every time 3 questions, and then we give the floor to Waddah Khanfar to respond. So left, right, and center. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Waddah, for this great presentation. Nuruddin Miladi from Sultan Qaboos University. Thank you very much for opening our minds vis-a-vis these large and big issues. There is a trend in Western context. There are youth who now are using these revolutionary tools through social media and the different digital platforms. What is very important is that there is a new generation of young Jews. There are great examples, and I think each one of us would remember one of the names through podcasts or any other platforms. How can you explain such phenomenon? Is this an attempt to defend this Jewish legacy, or is it belonging to the other, and in this case, the Israeli state? And what is our role as academics in this clash of narratives? How do you see the mechanisms that you should undertake in order to deconstruct this Western narrative from the inside and not externally? Thank you very much. Can I pose a question in English? Go ahead. IFA University. what are the facets of this regional kind of projects. We're talking about a gradual perspective that starts with the necessities and then it moves into something else. What does it mean? If there is a way for more complementarity and integration, economically speaking, particularly when we look at this development taking place in Iraq vis-a-vis or via Turkey, and if this is manifesting through defense agreements and joint military manufacturing or industries through building railways and so on and so forth. So the philosophy lies in the matter of integration. So to put an end to these relationships that were severed between the main nations in this region who are interrelated, and we have to put an end to this disconnect. We have to do that through everything that is possible, not necessarily through a nationalistic or ideological kind of perspective or discourse. In the past, this used to be impossible because of the direct hegemony of the West. Anyone who would communicate with the US, they would tell them, forget about it and do not go into it. So the situation now is in decline when it comes to the influence, and I think that Europe is also retreating from this conflict in a very apparent way. So the transformation in the balance of power leads to a number of cracks, and I think we can build such an opinion. You can tell me that the Arab governments or the region at large are not ready, but I'd like to tell you that with time, these necessities, the necessities of the regimes themselves, are going to make it incumbent on them to start communicating and resorting to military and economic and strategic integration. We have to support such a trend, albeit we would like it to be an accelerated one, but not through words. We have to establish our own networks. We, as media personnel, for instance, we have to have their own comprehensive fora for our particular region. When I talk about or nations, we're talking about Arabs, Amazigh, Turks, and Persians. We, as professors, university professors, also, we have to have such networks. Now it is possible for us to establish this kind of comprehensive inclusive kind of component that is trans-border, transnational, in a way that is beyond what our forefathers thought about because of the technologies that we have. This integrated system, if it becomes our priority, this is going to be the beginning of the Renaissance. There is no such thing as one individual country with its own capabilities, economic and strategic, to become a geopolitical center that can stand alone. This is something that we should do, and also we have to confront the Israeli current. You know that Israel, for the US, it is the advanced fortress, and this is a term that was particularly by the Kingdom of Jerusalem when Western armies decided to consider this Kingdom of Jerusalem as the advanced fortress in order to defend the Western civilization against Islamic barbarism. So that is why they try to dismantle us, to splinter us. So the concept of sovereign relations among nations perspective is Israeli, irrespective of the incentives. Some are ignorant, some others do it intentionally. Irrespective of that, this is an Israeli theory that should be confronted by a counter theory that tries to establish complementarity, integration, that there's a Jewish movement that aims to resist the use of anti-Semitism as a weapon against freedom of opinion vis-a-vis Palestine. This is great, and perhaps the only nation that can do that is the Jews, and I think that they did a great thing, some of the youth that worked on such perspective, particularly those who work in universities or outside universities, intellectuals and thinkers who boldly write and say that the future of the Jews is not linked to Israel or attached to Israel, and that Israel constitutes a threat to the Jews. This is very important indeed. When you see Jews who are arrested and sued, this is not in keeping with the laws that prevailed previously. This is also very useful, and this is something that we need to look at as a strategic leap, something that was unexpected in recent years. The last point that I would like to talk about, our role when it comes to the clash of narratives and the gap that is being formed between the West and us. This is between the different disintegrated centers of power. Not between us as Muslims and Arabs. We are the last to arrive and not the first to arrive to this party. Latin America preceded us, and they disconnected themselves from the US and the Western system. Africa as well, they have their own ideas when it comes to African Renaissance that tries to resort to being renaissance and also to look at the colonial power as a power that led to their splintering. And also when it comes to Asia, ASEAN is one of the most important organizations. We're the last to arrive. We're still associated and linked to the West intellectually and so on and so forth. Our students still go to the West to study. We're the last to reach such a conviction. So the gap that exists is between the West and the rest of the world, and we have to go back to the world and not to keep on sticking to the trail of the West. So when it comes to the definition of the global South, in actual fact, this is not a geographical idea. It is at some point in time, but it is also a cultural and a civilizational concept. Those who take to the street in the streets of Germany, Italy, and so on and so forth, these are part of the global South. These are the marginalized, those who are not approved of, not welcome in the centers of power. So there is an elite that controls the authority of power and money as it is delineated by the West. So we'd like to start from here. So now we're going to give the floor to the ladies to take the floor. Wafa Abu Shakra from the Lebanese University. Mr. Khanfar, you used a euphemistic and diplomatic expression when you said that our nations in this particular region, our people in this particular region are questioning and wondering who is going to fill the vacuum. So they're looking for what is called a wali amr, the one who is going to be in charge of them, because they got used to the fact that the ruling powers and regime in this region and for some time are always searching for networking with these Western forces from which they get their own legitimacy, and they pay a price for that. There is no hope in Lebanon. The smallest kind of job, you would wait for what the Americans would say vis-a-vis that, what the Iranians are going to say. We always wait for a decision to be taken from other countries, even when it comes to a job as a doorkeeper. I would like to thank you, Mr. Waddah, for your presentation. If you can introduce yourself, please. Monia Abidi from the University of Manouba, Tunisia. Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Waddah. My appreciation to what you have presented. We are in dire need for this different viewpoint, which is different and optimistic as well. Do you think that Al-Aqsa flood is the last nail that was put in the coffin of our civilization, that is going to accelerate its demise, and that has led to this level of aggressiveness and the collapse of values as well? Do you think that this period of time, this aggressive period, do you think it is going to remain for quite some time in order for us to build this inclusive system that would be a launching pad for us, as the West did when they looted all the wealth and after that they reached technological and scientific advancement? I liked what you said when you mentioned that we have to build bridges amongst countries and states in order to go back and become how we used to be during our Arab and Islamic civilization. Thank you very much. Amjad Jmil, Palestinian researcher. Amjad Jibril, sorry. So going back to the idea of globalizing the Palestinian cause, one Egyptian thinker said that the globalization of the Palestinian cause is much more possible than Arabizing it. So introducing the international dimension is much easier than establishing a kind of a regional or an Arab dimension. There is a very important book that I read, which is the boycott movement. And I would like to mention one simple idea that was referred to in that particular book. They said that the most difficult component when it comes to the globalization of the Palestinian cause lies in the internal part of Palestine and the Arab region. Those Palestinians cannot come up with alternative networks that can communicate with the West and those who share our values for them to solve this problematic. For instance, when you have قافلة الصمود and it is stopped in either in Sirte or in Egypt, and the same applies to Israel. So this is the problematic. So what do you propose when it comes to the caravan of resilience for us to change the situation? The internal structure in Palestine and in the Arab world alike should be changed. We're going to listen to Mr. Waddah. He's going to be as brief as possible, and then we're going to go for one last round of questions for us to be able to end at 10:15. So we do not this to spill over the remaining sessions and make us late for the remaining sessions. So first of all, we have to pay heed to one particular point, and this is in response to your question when it comes to the Arab reality. The system that created Palestine, I think that there is a real connection. How can we overcome that? As I said, indeed, we have to start recommunicating with the past. We woke up and they told us that the past was a mistake and we are a new nation, and it was proven to us that this was not going to be useful. When you ask the Chinese, the communists, they would tell you in the last 3,000 years we did this, and in the last 5 years and in the coming 1,000 years we're looking forward to doing that. So there is continuity. When you do not have this continuation, you reach kind of a distorted formula or result. So we are dissociated from the past and the present. So when you say we have nothing to do with the past, then this is the beginning of this distorted situation. So the Arab nations that have been formed as a result of Sykes-Picot, it is the same system that led to this dismantlement that we have, and that has created Israel as well. We have a problem. We do not want to destroy this component because it can lead to civil wars, and we see the chaotic situation in the Arab world. But we have to be knowledgeable, aware of the problem for us to be able to find gradual solutions. So we're talking about rising complementarity or gradual integration. So even the centers of powers cannot do that, even if they do want that, because they are linked militarily and economically with these regimes and systems, these conquering and overwhelming systems. We talked about unity and started with unity, and now the ceiling: how can you live alone, how can you meet for your needs, and we have no problem to disintegrate and dismantle our countries. So this is a pivotal matter. The second point, the Aqsa flood, has it accelerated the situation? Yes, there are 4 accelerating factors since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union is one of the accelerating factors when it comes to the central position of the West. This this acceleration and this collapse of the Soviet Union has led to revealing and exposing this situation that we have and has led to the collapse of this oppression and despotism that we see around us. So in actual fact, this despotism is an accelerating factor. And this is something that has targeted something that is very important indeed. So when we attempt to come up with pivotal results, this is due to this self-glorification that we resort to. And there's another point, which is the war between 2001 2003, the war on terrorism, when all the sanctities are targeted. So the war on terrorism was the beginning of what we see now. So international law talked about that, and all the alliances that were established, and the United Nations that was established by the Western system, and also international law. And when it comes to rights, the rights were one of the bases of Western civilizations, can be violated, justified by fighting terrorism, and also what used to be called in the Islamic world, those who have Islamic roots. All of them have accelerated the process of decline and destruction. So the first story was the self-centrality, and also the second one has to do with rights, and the third one was the economy, the retreat and regression in the economy. And we have not seen any recovery yet as a result of that particular economic decline that hit the world in 2008. So we talk about one of the most beautiful components, the prosperity that is always promised in the West, comprehensive wealth in the West that was always been promised. The Aqsa deluge or flood has come to remove the last veil of liberal values that at some point in time were the justification that was given to the world vis-a-vis globalization. And also globalization in actual fact was the way by which the West economically and culturally through which was able to control us. So can you see that we're all wearing the same attire? If we go back 800 years, you will see the Tunisian will wear a different traditional attire. We have been globalized culturally, and also our cooking has been globalized. The movies that we watch, we have all been globalized. And Corona created one of the problematics of globalization, which is economic globalization. And this was also another nail in that particular system. And this is expanding, accelerating, and increasing this huge gap between what was supposed to happen in order for us to see this grand value of the West and the decline that we see before us. If the value system has been exposed, this is going to be the last thing. You can have an economic crisis, but still your values are still there. You can have an issue with the balance of power, but this does not affect your value system. I think that the Aqsa flood was able to detect and expose this. I think in the last 20 to 30 years, this central position is not going to be present as a very important center for the nations of the world. Would like to take only 2 questions from the right and from the left. Dr. Islam Hilal from Marmara University. First of all, I would like to salute you for this very deep and advanced intervention. And I would like to tackle 2 points. So the definition who we are and who is the other. This is a problematic. Those who lead the dynamism in the West are not newcomers or migrants or sons of the migrants. These are people, native people who have who've come from migratory trends, but so what can unite these disparate people? Can it be nationalism or Islamic identity? Those who show solidarity, their impetus is not necessarily creedal. I think we need a new kind of pot that we all belong to. This seems to be still enigmatic and we need to research into it. You talked about something else. So the Middle East, how would the Arab region be managed? Taking into account the different times and also this civilizational circle and the reality of the Jews that exists in the land of Palestine. So there are some people who know no other nation other than this one. So how do we envisage that in the coming days and what kind of solution do you see could happen in the future? One last intervention. Yes, go ahead. I do apologize for to my colleagues from Al Jazeera. So this is intentional discrimination. Mohammed Tahir Az-Zin, in the last 2 years, we have seen the appearance of hundreds of accounts managed by the Israelis in order to counter the Palestinian narrative. To what extent was the Arab region able to deconstruct these campaigns and not to complain about them? 4 or 6 minutes. With regard to the first question, the other is the oppressive, and we are the ones that prevail through the values and the definition that we should give. We are part of a global dynamism. And those you have mentioned, those who defend Gaza and defend themselves, as you have said, all of those in actual fact are us, irrespective of culture, language, and religion. The battle now is a battle of priorities. You have to set your priorities, and the first priority is to destroy this colonial exploitation and this repressive destruction of every historical and cultural value. This is the priority when it comes to our war. That is why we call for a global alliance for these values. All of these are very important indeed. This might not be formulated as we wish, but psychologically speaking, we are the people of this nation. We have to go beyond thinking that the other is all in one basket. There are two Wests and not one West. And there is a South that is part and parcel of you. When you go to the forum, I was in South Africa and I participated in a forum, a security forum. And when you attend political and security fora, when you're an Arab or a Muslim or a Palestinian, you're accused until you prove yourself otherwise. So I said that even when I took the floor. And I said I felt for the first time that I was comfortable and I was talking about something interesting. You come in from Palestine. We never heard such a narrative. I think there is a redefinition that is now going back to the centers of power in the South, and it is going to follow suit in the North. This generation that we see, this generation, with the help of God Almighty, is going to make it to the centers of power. We see the Democratic and the Republican parties, and you see the amount of youth moving into new trends when it comes to Palestine and Israel. This is a very important matter. I think this is a message of hope. We were under siege intellectually, ideologically, culturally, civilizationally. We were under siege with the other, and I think the other now is getting more and more solid in their centers of power, but they're getting more and more communicative and open with their own people, and this is very useful for us. The other point pertinent to the Jews who were born in Palestine, Western Crusade civilization stayed in our region for 200 years. And we say that Salah ad-Din liberated Jerusalem after 88 years, but they remained between Jaffa and Beirut on the coastal area for 100 years after Salah ad-Din, and they went back to Jerusalem afterwards. This existence, we're talking about generations. And when you read what happened during that period, and some of those generations that lived on Palestinian land and parts of Lebanon during that period of time, they mixed with the Arabs. Some of them went into consanguine relations. Some others, they got married to each other. There has been trade and business and so on and so forth. But the power, center of power, remained colonial until it was removed. So your battle is not with the people, it is with the center of power, centers of power. People can live together. So if you analyze some of our DNA, you would find some consanguinity. So this is what happened. There's no problem whatsoever when it comes to human relations. I think the problem lies in this system of hegemony, the system of exclusion and marginalization and colonialism or occupation that we see. And we should not accept such systems, neither in form nor in essence, nor even partially. We as Palestinians, as Arabs, we have to redefine what we want from Palestine. This is key, in my view, that these partial solutions that we thought at some point in time, in a moment of mirage, that we wanted to achieve the two-state solution, and so many things that have happened in the last 30 years. If we do not learn from these lessons, we're not going to learn. We have to redefine the conflict. It is against one whole system. If we do not do so, we're going to keep on suffering, and we're going to reach a clash until their arrogance, their colonial power, their occupational power comes to an end. The problem does not lie in the people, but in the regimes and systems. And I would like to conclude. My message to you is that we are facing a new era. We are very lucky as a generation or generations to see these things happening in our world. Perhaps our fathers were not as lucky as we are, nor our forefathers. Since 1948 till date, we see these new realities and these transformations in the international system and in the value system, and also the pivotal change happening in the street. All of these are great things. This means that each one of us is responsible. We have to take part in this historical dynamism for us to give something to our offspring. So the contract that should be concluded should be between those who died defending freedom in the world at large and in Palestine, and the same contract should be concluded with those who are still alive. And this is also a contract that is going to be concluded with those who are going to be born after us. This is going to be a contract of strife based on values, and it is not looking for anything or any spoils that would be gained very quickly, or to be in the or to resort to ending the situation as quickly as possible. We need to have a kind of a transgenerational sense of patience to solve this cause. Irrespective of the time it takes, it is going to be good for us and for the generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waddah Khanfar. And I'd like to thank the audience. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Waddah, for your inspiring remarks. We'll start the first session for today, the role of media in genocide, strategies of discourse and the thesis. Mohammed Krichen will be the moderator. Dr. Wael Abdelala, Assistant Professor at the Department of Mass Communication from Qatar University, will be participating as a panelist. Also, Dr. Bushra, a researcher and Professor of Sociology, Dr. Bushra Zakkag, and Dr. Nihad Sheikh Khalil, also from the Islamic University from Gaza, and Mr. Bilal Doufish from the Birzeit University as well, please. Thank you, ma'am. Amongst those mentioned, we have 2 persons here and 3 through Zoom. We have Dr. Wael Abdelal and Shahd Abu Mahfouz. We'll start with the 2 panelists, and please abide by the time. 15 minutes as maximum, because we have 5 panelists. We'll start with Wael Abdelal, the assistant professor at the Department of Mass Communication from Qatar University, and he had prepared this paper with Dr. Hala Gutta, the head of Mass Communication Department from the same university. I need to put my glasses on. Hala Gutta, yes. Please. Thank you. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. This issue relates to a different kind of context. I'll be talking about the journalists from the academic perspective, away from the journalistic kind of addressing of the issue, especially following the targeting of a number of journalists in sector Gaza. This work is still going on. I and Dr. Hala Gutta, the head of Mass Communication Department at the Qatar University, still working on it. There are different dimensions. The general context of the reality of journalists in Gaza following the 7th of October, and then the research problem, and then the methodology, the theoretical framing, and the rudimentary findings as the research is still going on. And we hope that this research will lead to a number of scientific papers. As you know, the reality of journalists in Gaza perhaps is an exceptional one, because the Palestinian journalists in Gaza have witnessed different dynamics in comparison to others. Correspondents Without Borders, with a bit of reservations, talked about 200 Palestinian journalists who had been killed during 18 months of the war. 44 of them, at least, were targeted because there were journalists. It is a commonplace to say that the Palestinian journalists during the difficult war used to suffer as the other civilians used to suffer. They used to face starvation. They were displaced as the other civilians. Correspondents Without Borders said that the environment of work in Gaza is the most dangerous across the world, and the Gazan journalists worked in an impossible environment, bombardment, mass displacement, and as a matter of fact, we witnessed the killing of a number of Al Jazeera journalists. Mr. Wael Al-Dahdouh was targeted, his family was targeted, some undergone amputation procedures, and some sustained injuries that will stay with them for life. And there was no electricity, no headquarters, no communications, and difficulty in reaching certain areas, in addition to provocation as well as blackmailing and so on and so forth. The Israeli spokespersons used to incite targeting journalists, and some of the Western media outlets justified killing these journalists, especially the ones that are categorized as independent, like the Bild newspaper in Germany. It says that these targeted journalists were members of Hamas and so on and so forth. So the research problem here relates to not only the documentation of journalism, but here we would like to frame the research scientifically. So these journalists play the role of the journalist witness in this coverage. So we can call it the embodied side, and how the war affects the identity of journalists and the profession, as well as the psychological impact. Within our theoretical research, we focus on three concepts: the embodied testimony, as journalists do not witness the event per se, but they are part and parcel of the event, as they provide testimonies through their work. And the second concept is the fact that the media plays a major role not only in conveying the news, but it is to do with passing a message, clinging to a mission, because the journalists have stayed in Gaza and they knew that their destiny will be either martyrdom or sustaining injury, and so on and so forth. So it was very difficult for them to work. And there's also the other concept that relates to intersectionality, whereby age, kind of disability, identity, and so on and so forth overlap between each other. Some colleagues couldn't continue, and the war affects people differently, as everybody knows. The methodology of this paper related to the so-called qualitative methodology and the scrutinizing of the journalists' work through interviews. We have conducted 15 interviews, and we're still conducting interviews with journalists from different categories. We focused on the diversity of the experience. Some journalists sustained injuries, some journalists that we've interviewed were arrested and then released, and some lost their families, and so on and so forth. And we've interviewed both males and females, obviously, and we took into consideration the moral considerations and the confidentiality, and we have received the consent by the research council at the university to protect the data and to be confidential. And there's another concept that relates to avoiding invoking the shock through our interviews. As far as the information is concerned, we've delved into the nature of work, the personal targeting, the code of conduct that has been followed by the Palestinian journalists. And by the way, there was no foreign correspondence, as everybody knows, in Gaza. Only the Palestinian journalists played the role of conveying the messages and the information. The foreigners were banned from entering Gaza, and hence there is another challenge that relates to professionalism, neutrality, objectivity, and the moral dilemmas in this context. There's also the issue of the identity, intersectionality, gender, the social background, and the role of the families and their responsibilities. And we know how our journalists have suffered because of the presence of their families and journalists who would have liked to focus on their profession thought of providing the basic needs to their families to survive. Also, we've dealt with the international representation and the challenges that journalists have encountered, especially those who worked for the international agencies and the limits that can be pushed. Some journalists were very conservatives when it came to using certain terminology or figures and describing certain scenes and so on and so forth. And this has represented a great challenge because they would have seen the tragedy and they couldn't portray the tragedy and convey it to the world because of certain limitations. There's also the issue of supporting the journalists by some institutions, and I said that most of the institutions used to provide support to the journalists in accordance with their own capacities, but still the journalists who had suffered greatly were the freelancers or the ones who had worked with institutions that had few capacities and few funds and were of a second or third rank. One of the journalists said, and this is a quotation, one of the journalists said that producing news or one footage from Gaza might cost the journalist his or her life. And every journalist who documents any scene is part and parcel of the whole picture. The loss of the family, starvation, famine, and tragedy. And usually the report would have taken 1 hour, but because of these circumstances, it used to take 1 day or 2 days to refine the report. Another journalist said that that our office has been decimated. My camera has been destroyed, and my other equipment, and we were bombarded incessantly. And on one day, a bomb has landed just next to my tent, and one or some of my colleagues were targeted directly. You have 1 minute left. So, yes, 1 minute, thank you. As far as the findings of this study, journalists who have lived by the embodied testimony faced a blurry kind of fine line between the truth and what they have conveyed because of the personal suffering. Secondly, objectivity, neutrality, and other kind of media values were under scrutiny, under the test, and these journalists have gone through this bitter experience because they needed to take decisions accurately, especially when they needed to protect their stories and for them to be not politicized. The other issue is to do with the intersectionality and the identity. The study will be leading to uncovering some differences between a journalist and another. Some paid their life for as a cost of this profession, and others left. Others were arrested, and so on and so forth. The last finding, the fifth one, is to do with the discrepancy of support that journalists used to receive. Some institutions did support them strongly and others weakly. Thank you very much, Dr. Wael Abdelal, for this paper. Now we'll move to Shahd Abu Mahfouz, and she's a researcher in audio-visual translation and media studies, and the paper is entitled Genocide in Headline, a corpus-assisted critical discourse analysis of Arabic and English media in war reporting on Gaza. And please, could you abide by the time? You got 15 times, because usually I'm scared of PowerPoints because the speaker would go to the rostrum and he'll be away from you. They will be carried out away, and then we'll be losing touch.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, طاب صباحكم جميعا. Good morning.
terminology is used in headlines. In simple and clear questions, what strategies do media outlets employ, and how does these choices reflect ideology? The aim is to compare Arabic and English headlines from October 2023 to May 2024, focusing on key terms like genocide, massacre, war, or resistance, and their collocations. The goal is to reveal differences in narrative construction. The corpus includes 2,000 headlines, 1,000 Arabic, 1,000 English, by selecting 500 headlines from each news outlet manually and organizing them in Excel sheets. This corpus is about one of the intense periods of war from October 7th, 2023 to May 31st or 31, 2024, which are the first 6 months of the war. Quantitative analysis was done with AntConc, measuring keyword frequency, collocations, concordance. The search keywords for news headlines were selected under Gaza war and genocide discourse, such as Gaza, Israel, the occupation, which is al-ihtilal, genocide as ibadah, massacre, majzara, war, harb, and Hamas as Hamas. This is like an example of how the corpus was organized through Excel sheets, the headline, the data, and the link headline for referencing or like easier reach if needed. For every single outlet it was done, and then like they were all like compiled together in order to make one corpus, one Arabic, one English. Now, qualitative analysis applied for Clough three-dimensional critical discourse model, text, discourse practice, and socio-cultural practice, showing the choice of Palestinian or Israeli narrative, grammatical choices, whether it is in the active or passive voice, nominalization, and the metaphors used in the news, if any, in addition to the ideological and political aims of the headlines. In the context of media discourse, it stresses that media texts are not only to report events, they build realities shaped by institutional interests and political pressure on news outlets. This is especially clear in conflict reporting, where lexical choices play a crucial role in the headline of the news, such as describing an attack as a massacre versus describing it as a clash. This can alter public perception, assign or diffuse blame, and narrate violence differently. In terms of quantitative analysis, the Arabic corpus, in the Arabic corpus, the word genocide appeared 165 times. As you can see, the words and how many single one appeared, the selected words in order to study. In English corpus, Israel appeared 618 times, Gaza 569 times, but genocide only appeared 21 times. Both news headlines and the numbers analyzed show a clear asymmetry. Arabic headlines are more explicit, English headlines are more restrained. And to be honest, while looking at the English media, I tried to search the word massacre or genocide, and it didn't appear that much. Like, the corpus was supposed to be manual done. Like I would search for the news from this time to this time, but I looked for the word, and it wasn't like it wasn't mentioned in the headlines. The patterns in the study exposed the Arabic headlines link Israel with occupation and army, one more likely force, but like aggression at the same time, and Gaza with famine, destruction, and struggle, while English headlines link Hamas with gunmen and attack. This framing criminalizes Palestinians while legitimizing Israeli actors. And here we can see the Arabic corpus, the word Israel, how many examples, and it's still going in AntConc. Now, in terms of actor representation, Arabic media portrays Israel as the aggressor, as mentioned, using the terms like occupation and aggression. English media, in some examples, label Palestinians as gunmen, while Israeli is framed as formal military force.
الإسرائيليين على أنهم قوة عسكرية رسمية.
And here we can see the word massacre and how it appeared in AntConc. So almost no examples. In the Arabic corpus, in terms of qualitative
حيث
analysis,
التحليل
Israel was
النوعي.
frequently paired
إسرائيل
with
ظهرت
genocidal
بشكل
actions and violent
متكرر
attacks.
وربطها بعمليات
Israel
الهجوم
was rarely referred
العنيفة
to neutral terms,
والأعمال
but still some headlines were
الإبادية.
targeted to
هناك
talk about Israel
بعض
itself.
العناوين التي
Some headlines
تتحدث
were
عن
about
إسرائيل
leaders
وبعض
from the
العناوين
word
الأخرى
mentioning
تتحدث عن قادة
Israel
للعالم
or other news
بإشارة
outlets,
إلى
important
إسرائيل.
headlines about
وهناك
the
بعض العناوين
situation from the
الأخرى التي
Israeli
تتحدث
perspective
عن
in
الوضع
terms of the
من
conflict.
المنظور الإسرائيلي فيما يخص
Across the
النزاع
English
الجاري.
corpora, actor
فيما يخص
representation varies and
مجموع
demonstrates
العناوين
a clear
والنصوص الإنجليزية
asymmetry in
تظهر أن
labeling
هناك
practices.
عدم
When it
تناظر
comes
فيما
to
يخص
atrocity
الممارسات
representation,
المعتمدة.
Arabic
عندما
headlines
يتعلق
frequently
الأمر
use
بتمثيل
genocide and
العناوين العربية
massacre,
تتحدث عن
signals a
المجزرة
discursive refusal to
والإبادة،
minimize or
وهذا مؤشر على
euphemize the
الرفض
scale of
بأن
violence
يتم
happening in
تلطيف
Gaza.
نطاق
English
العنف الذي
headlines
يجري في غزة.
reserve
العناوين
these terms
الإنجليزية تبقي
selectively,
هذه
often for Israeli
العناصر
victims. The
والمصطلحات
BBC and the
بشكل
New York
انتقائي
Times
لتبقى
outlets
فقط
tend to
خاصة
reserve
بالضحايا
legally charged labels for
الإسرائيليين،
specific
ويتم
incidents
استخدام
that fit a
بعض
particular narrative frame,
المصطلحات
which reveals the
التي ذات
limited and
أبعاد
selective use
قانونية التي
of
يتم
such terms
استخدامها
that serve
في
to neutralize
طرق
large-scale violence, thereby softening
لتحديد
attributes of
من
responsibility.
وقع
The
العنف
contrast
واسع
between
النطاق
Western media and Arabic media
والتباين
is
بين
clear,
وسائل الإعلام
even when
الإنجليزية
both
والعربية
highlight
هو
war
واضح
using
حتى
different
عندما يكون هناك
expressions.
استخدام
And when
تعبيرات
studying the
مختلفة
lexical
تتعلق بالحرب.
strategies, Arabic
عندما ننظر
outlets
إلى الاستراتيجيات
highlighted
فإن
Palestinian victimhood and international
المؤسسات
law.
العربية
English
تتحدث
outlets
عن
use passive
ضحايا
voice
العرب
and
حسب
military
القانون الدولي،
vocabulary, softening responsibility. And yesterday, a lot
والمؤسسات
of researchers
الغربية
actually
هناك
mentioned
الكثير
this
من
too.
الأبحاث التي
Now,
تشير
in
على أنه
conclusion,
يتم
the study
تلطيف
shows that
الوضع.
headlines do not
الدراسة
simply
توضح أن
report
العناوين
events,
الأخبار
they
لا
construct
تبلغ عن
realities.
الأخبار فقط، هي
Arabic media
تشكل
explicitly
وقائع،
names atrocities
ووسائل
and
الإعلام
positions
العربية
Palestinians
تتحدث
as
عن
victims
الوقائع
of genocide.
وموقع
English frames the conflict
الفلسطينيين
in
كضحايا
institutional
النزاع،
and military
وكذلك
terms, often
تعطي
obscuring
أبعاد
responsibility. By analyzing language, we
مؤسسية
see
التي
how
تحاول
narratives
أن تخفي
clash and how
المسؤولية.
words
نرى أن
themselves
هناك تضارب ما
shape
بين
global
السرديات
perceptions
وكيف
of
أن
Gaza.
السرديات هي تشكل
Thank you.
المفاهيم العالمية المرتبطة
That's it.
بغزة. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
شكرا جزيلا سيدة شهد. الآن ننتقل إلى المداخلة الثالثة، وهي للدكتورة بشرى زكاغ، وهي باحثة وأستاذة جامعية في علم الاجتماع الرقمي. ستكون معنا من المغرب عبر الزوم، والورقة هي الحرب بين الإخفاء والمكاشفة، العراق في سردية الحرب لم تقع، وغزة في السرديات الشبكية المتنافسة. أرجو أن تكون معنا. على كل من يتعذر أن تكون مشاركته معنا مباشرة، لدينا تسجيل لمداخلة قد نستعين بها في حالة تعذر الاتصال عبر الزوم. إذا هناك من هو حاضر الآن قبل الدكتورة بشرى، بإمكاننا أن نذهب إليه. دكتور نهاد. إذن دكتور نهاد الشيخ خليل سيكون معنا من غزة، وهذه يعني مشاركة متميزة، يسعدنا أن تكون معنا غزة مباشرة. وهو أستاذ مشارك في تاريخ القضية الفلسطينية والصراع العربي الإسرائيلي في الجامعة الإسلامية بغزة، والورقة البحثية هي بنية خطاب الكراهية في الإعلام الإسرائيلي والدولي. أهلا وسهلا بك دكتور نهاد الخليل، و15 دقيقة فلتتفضل. مش هو الذي كان موجودا بالصورة؟ نعود إلى الدكتورة بشرى إذن. أهلا وسهلا بك دكتورة بشرى. تفضلي، معك 15 دقيقة من دكتورة بشرى زكاغ من المغرب. ونذكر الحرب بين الإخفاء والمكاشفة، العراق في سردية الحرب لم تقع، وغزة في السرديات الشبكية المتنافسة. تفضلي. تسمعيننا دكتورة؟ شكلنا راح لا نحصل لا الدكتورة بشرى ولا الدكتور نهاد ولا إذا خلينا إذا تعذر لنذهب للتسجيلات التي لدينا، لأنه مش معقول راح نضل هكذا دون أن نتمكن من. لنذهب إلى التسجيلات التي لديكم اللي موجودة. صوت افتحوا الصوت. هذا مسجل.
اوكي دكتورة بشرى، احنا في الزوم نسمعك.
أعمال هذا المؤتمر. السادة المشاركون، أرحب بكم جميعا وأجدد اعتذاري عن عدم قدرتي على المشاركة موقعيا معكم في هذا
وحتى سلايدز يعني مشاركة معنا، يعني سلايدز تظهر لنا عنوان الورقة: الحرب بين إخفاء ومكاشفة، ومن إعداد دكتورة بشرى زكاغ.
إذا الزوم ومعها سلايدز كارثة، صح ولا لا؟ هي واحدة مش ضابطة، فما بالك نعملوا الزوم ومعها سلايدز. يا جماعة الخير، لو كنا على الهواء مباشرة كانوا ذهبوا فاصل، واحنا ما عندناش فواصل هنا. شو نعمله؟ أعطيونا المادة المسجلة وبلاش منها الزوم. أعطيونا المادة المسجلة التي لديكم.
أنا الآن بأحكي، أنتم مش سامعيني؟ أنا بأحكي.
باهي، ممتاز. الآن سامعيني. سيد نهاد،
سامعين صوتي؟ نهاد، نعم.
أيوة.
نهاد.
إذا تفضل يا سيدي. تفضل سيد نهاد، تفضل يا سيدي.
طيب، أنا طبعا معيش، ما فيش سلايدات، أيوة. أنا ما فيش سلايدات معايا، أنا ممكن أحكي بدون سلايدات، هيك خبروني إنه أفضل.
أي أحسن.
بس
تفضل.
شايف أنا الدكتورة بتعرض السلايدات.
لا تفضل أنت يا دكتور.
مين يبدأ، أنا ولا الدكتورة؟
لا تفضل أنت الدكتور نهاد.
نعم.
خلي الدكتورة بعدين، خلينا الآن أعطونا فول سكرين على الدكتور نهاد. تفضل دكتور، تفضل.
ماشي الحال. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أود في البداية أن أشكركم على إتاحة هذه الفرصة لكي أشارك معكم في هذا المؤتمر. عنوان ورقتي: خطاب الكراهية وتمثلاته في الإعلام الإسرائيلي. هذه الورقة يعني سأقوم خلالها بتحليل ما ورد في 32 مقال منشورة على موقع معهد مسقاف لدراسات الأمن القومي والاستراتيجية الصهيونية، وهو يعني هذه مقالات منشورة في الصحف الإسرائيلية جمعها هذا المعهد من الفترة من يوم 8 أكتوبر وحتى 24 نوفمبر عام 2023. تعريف الكراهية أو تعريف خطاب الكراهية كما هو موجود في الأمم المتحدة واليونسكو وغيرها من المؤسسات الدولية، أنه هو كل الكلام والكتابة والسلوك الذي يحقر الآخرين ويهينهم ويحرض عليهم بسبب هويتهم وليس بسبب الأعمال التي يقومون بها. طبعا يعني هذا ويشجع طبعا على العدوان عليهم. هل خطاب الكراهية هذا كان موجود في المجتمع في إسرائيل ولا مش موجود قبل 7 أكتوبر؟ طبعا على السريع هنالك 5 مراجع سأتطرق إليها تتحدث عن هذا الموضوع. المرجع الأول هنالك كتاب للدكتور صالح النعامي عنوانه فقه التوحش، يتحدث عن الفتاوى الحاخامات التي تدعو للقتل وتدعو لاحتقار الآخرين وكل ما يتعلق بالجويم وعلى وجه التحديد الفلسطينيين. هنالك كتاب آخر للدكتورة نوريت الحنان بيلد. هذه الدكتورة عملت دراسة عن صورة الفلسطيني في المناهج أو في الكتب المدرسية الإسرائيلية، وتحدثت بوضوح، ودراسة كبيرة ومهمة، وتحدثت بكل وضوح عن أن الكتب المدرسية تؤطر الفلسطيني في أو يتم تأطير الفلسطيني فيها على أنه تهديد أمني وخطر ديموغرافي، ويتم تبرير كل ما تقوم به إسرائيل من عدوان على الشعب الفلسطيني على أنه ضرورة أمنية ودفاع عن الذات بشكل كبير جدا، وأنه الفلسطيني يعني إنسان بدائي، وأنه مجرد من الهوية الوطنية أو الهوية الثقافية. بعد ذلك وتقريبا يعني على مدار العقدين ونصف الآخرين تم إصدار أو يمكن رصد 3 محطات في موضوع توجيه الخطاب في إسرائيل. المحطة الأولى كانت عام 2002 حيث تم إصدار كتيب اسمه هسبرة اللي هو الدعاية. هذا الكتاب كان عبارة عن أو كتيب عبارة عن توجيه للشباب والطلاب الجامعيين، صدر عام 2002. طبعا كانت انتفاضة الأقصى، كان شارون في الحكم، وكانت أحداث 11 سبتمبر، وأرادت إسرائيل أن تؤطر خطابها وأن تدرب شبابها الذين يتعاملون مع الرأي العام العالمي على وضع إسرائيل في معسكر الأخيار الذي حدده جورج بوش الابن الرئيس الأمريكي الأسبق، وأن تضع الفلسطينيين في معسكر الأشرار. وهذا يعني الكتيب كان يعتمد كثيرا على الإقناع بشكل كبير وواضح. المحطة الثانية أو عام 2009 تم إصدار كتيب اسمه Global Language Dictionary، وطبعا هذا كان وزارة الخارجية الإسرائيلية
Dictionary and the Israeli Foreign Ministry in coordination with an organization that is called the Project of Israel in America. Indeed, this project has encouraged the Israelis and the young activists who deal with the West, those who speak in English, they were encouraged to sympathize with the Palestinians just verbally, and blaming the Palestinians of what is happening to them because of the terrorist leadership. And there is a denial of the rights of the Palestinians in this booklet. And the right of self-defense has been manifest in this booklet to cover up the brutal use of force. And as you know, Israel has used the white phosphorus at the time, and Israel was blamed, and they wanted to change this image. In 2014, the Israelis adopted in their reports 2 narratives in dealing with the media. The first narrative is the legal one, whereby they focused on abiding by the international law and using force proportionately, and giving warnings before bombarding the sites and blaming Hamas of the use of humans as human shields. The other narrative that they focused on was to do with the infograph and the video use in order to exploit the visual narrative in order to softly demonize the Palestinians and to curb directly calling the Palestinians with vicious names and so on and so forth. This hate speech used to be there in Israel before the 7th of October, and there are 4 reasons. First and foremost is the ideology that relates to the Torah culture, anti-Semitism, and so on and so forth. The second reason is to do with, especially from the perspective of the right wing, they think that they living through the second phase of the war of independence. They want to expel the Palestinians, they want to confiscate land as much as they can. The third reason was to do with the scholars who deal with eschatology. They believe that the number of Jews is increasing and they would become the majority in the future. There is David Bassi who has conducted a study, and he is a futurist, and he belongs to the right wing, and he had spoken on the YouTube in the podcast as well about this issue. Israel 2048. He believes that the Jews will be increasing and they need the land, and hence the land ought to be void from the Palestinians, and this had propelled them to more hatred. And the fourth reason is to do with the fact that the Israelis do not believe that the Palestinians are a people or a national group. They believe that they are families. Even the Arabs, they believe that the Arab countries are failed countries because the Arab countries do not accommodate peoples, but they accommodate families, and they believe that the successful country headed by families, and the other kind of states are failed states. And Dr. Moti Kedar is the most prominent theoretician in this regard, and he's been participated in podcast programs of the right wing. As far as the 32 articles are concerned, these articles are very important because they have been written not by columnists or journalists, but by experts, and these experts do belong to the right wing, and hence what they write reflects a great importance of the entrenched hate, not only in the mentality of the Israelis and the daily reaction, but in the strategic thought of the Israelis. Following the analysis of these articles, the analysis of these articles is very simple, it's very easy, because the hate speech is very manifest in these kind of articles. I have divided the results to 5 axes. The first one is the collective criminalization and the justification of the full-fledged war. Hamas has been criminalized with all its members, with all its property. They used to call it Daesh, a Nazi party, a part of the axis of evil, serves the interests of Iran rather than the interests of Palestine. Moreover, the Palestinian society has been criminalized by and large. In accordance with the articles, a number of civilians on the 7th of October participated in taking hostages and in murder. And those who had not entered, they celebrated what took place on the 7th of October, and they don't use the word people, they use the word Palestinians per se. 60% they say support Hamas, and they support the 7th of October in accordance with these articles. Even mothers who support their sons to kill, and teachers do teach their pupils to die for the sake of killing the Jews. So there is a widespread criminalization of the resistance as well as the Palestinian civilians, and hence this justifies the fully-fledged war in accordance with these experts. So the articles call for blockade, stopping the supplies, cutting off the internet and the electricity and so on and so forth, and entering Gaza and purging it. And so this is the first axis that relates to the widespread criminalization and the full-fledged war. The second axis is to do with dehumanizing the Palestinians very clearly and very widely. Sentences the like of portraying the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance as cancer cells, mourning the law, and saboteurs, and so on and so forth. And hence, the language that has been used objectifies the Palestinians by and large, and turns the strip into a place that is dangerous security-wise, or infested with brutality and diseases, and hence it must be eradicated. The third axis is the legitimization of murder and inflicting injuries, sentences that are ubiquitous in the 32 articles. The 7th of October has provided legitimacy to Israel, as they say. They think that the military invasion is the only solution to prevent the catastrophe and preserve the existence of Israel. And as the Allies in 1945 occupied Berlin to get rid of Nazism, Israel must do the same. They believe that Sector Gaza believes only in the language of power, force, and they portray the war as a defense of the civilized war, and the yardstick of success is the increasing number of murdered Palestinians and the destruction of the residential areas. So this language legitimizes the actions of Israel, and any other alternative will be out of question. As far as the civilians and the militants are concerned, and the differences thereby, in the past they used to differentiate between the two, albeit civilians were targeted. But here, following the 7th of October, the writers, the experts of these articles, they did not deploy any efforts to differentiate between the two, but they called for killing the civilians. And this has been obvious in the articles. They called for killing all the members of Hamas and the destruction of the ministries, as well as the institutions, as well as the infrastructure, totally. Why? Because they believe that these services equip Hamas with power, and hence the Palestinians must be deprived from these services, because they labeled Hamas and blamed it for everything, and the Americans, as a matter of fact, consented to this, and hence the Israeli society will be supportive, and they say clearly that there is no difference between the militants and the civilians. The language that's being used portrays the civilians as being obstacles before achieving the objectives of the war, and hence the civilians must be eradicated. So the language denies the rights of the civilians as well as ignoring them in different instances and call for targeting the civilians. The language of the articles is very direct. There are some implicit messages in some of the expressions, the like of the call for mass killing, but the experts has talked about limiting some of this. And when they talk about the buffer zone or the security zone, these areas were evacuated from their inhabitants under bombardment, and hence they were forcibly displaced. When they talk about humanitarian zone or security zone or buffer zone, these areas were evacuated forcibly, and it is uninhabitable. When they talk about the city of tents, it is not a city. These areas are wastelands, and those who have been displaced were displaced forcibly, and these areas are uninhabitable. Israel also has been given by these articles a space to maneuver. And practically speaking, these experts have given Israel the opportunity to murder, to kill, and to decimate. So this is in brief, and I hope that I haven't taken much of your time. So here I have spoken about the representations of the hate speech in the Israeli media. I'd like to thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Nihad, for your intervention. I don't know whether Dr. Bushra Zukam is available. Can you hear me? Can you hear us, Doctor? Yes. Can you hear me?
Dr. Bushra Zuker, researcher and professor of sociology, digital media. She's going to be talking about war between concealment and revelation. Iraq in the narrative of the Gulf War did not take place, and Gaza in competing network narratives. I would like to thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizing committee. As it was mentioned by the moderator, the title is going to be War Between Concealment and Revelation, Iraq in the Narrative of the Gulf War. So I tried to look at the role of social media informing the reality of conflicts, and these networks have reflected this narrative from an ideologized narrative into a narrative at the level of social media. So we're facing difficulties here in the presenter, Dr. Bushra. So it doesn't mean they were not realistic. نعتذر للسادة والسيدات. We do apologize to the ladies and gentlemen listening to the translation. It is very difficult to hear the lady in her intervention. It tries to serve ideological or political objectives. So also we do apologize to the ladies and gentlemen listening to the translation into English. Unfortunately, we are trying to translate the intervention, but it is not possible due to the quality of sound. The speaker is not using a mic.
الذي صنع واقعا رمزيا وهميا لتبرير الغزو، والذي جعل بودريال يقول مقولته الشهيرة لا guerre du Golfe n'a pas eu lieu، بمعنى أن حرب الخليج لم تقع، ليس لأن الحرب لم تكن حقيقية أو مليئة بالدمار والقتل والفوضى، بل لأن كل ما شهده الجمهور من قصف ذكي لم يكن سوى عرض تلفزيوني مقنع ونظيف، لأن الإيديولوجيا والمصالح غطت على واقع الحرب، ومنه قدمتها وسائل الإعلام الأمريكية بأسلوب احتفالي جمالي وكأنه واقع مهرج في ألعاب نارية أطال من خلاله المجتمع الأمريكي والأوروبي بصفة عامة، وكأنه أمام حفل استعراضي بأسلوب إتيقي وذكي وحداثي ملائم ومريح للعين والنفس، وكذلك الوعي الأخلاقي الغربي. ومنها في الواقع الموضوعي لحرب العراق دخل قبل بداية الحرب وأثناءها وحتى بعد انتهائها مدار المصطنعي المتكامل. فأثناء الحرب لجأت عفوا الحرب أو قبل بداية الحرب وأثناءها كما قلت حتى بعد انتهائها مدار المصطنع المتكامل. قبل اندلاع الحرب لجأ الإعلام الأمريكي إلى استخدام الإعلام للإقناع والتعبئة من طريق الحديث عن وجود أسلحة دمار شامل. وغدا قصف العراق واندلاع الحرب استخدم الصحفيون الأمريكيون كأدوات للتحفيز والتضليل، ومنع البقية من الوصول المباشر إلى وقائع الحرب، وبذل مجهود مضاعف من طرف الإدارة الأمريكية وأذرعها الدبلوماسية المنتشرة في كل مكان للتعتيم وإخفاء واقع الحرب القاسي والعنيف، مثلا استخدام الفوسفور الأبيض في الفلوجة. وحتى بعد انتهاء الحرب وصل الإعلام الأمريكي واقع المصطنع المتكامل للحرب عبر تبرير الحرب وتشكيل صورة النصر وإسكات النقد من طريق إما الترهيب أو التهديد للدول والمؤسسات وحتى الأفراد، أو من طريق قصف مكاتب الإعلام الأخرى وقتل الصحفيين وإخماد أي سردية معارضة قبل خروجها للعلن وللرأي العام. وبذلك خضعت الحرب على العراق أو غزو العراق لمدار مصطنع متكامل لا يحجب الواقع الحقيقي للحرب وحسب، بل صار هو الواقع، واقع مغلق ومنتقى بدقة وإتقان وجودي لم ينجح في تعريته سوى الصحفي العراقي منتظر الزيدي. بالنسبة للنتيجة الثانية وهو الحرب على غزة في إطار معركة السرب الدعائي. في الأسابيع الأولى من 7 أكتوبر سيطرت السردية الإسرائيلية على الإعلام الغربي والمنصات الرقمية، وركزت على 4 أطروحات رئيسية، وهي إسرائيل الضحية وشطط الفلسطينيين وحماس والتصوت الأخلاقي والإنساني الإسرائيلي وشرعية أفعال إسرائيل. مع نهاية الشهر الأول نجحت القنوات الإخبارية العربية والشبكيون الفلسطينيون في تعزيز السردية الفلسطينية، خاصة عبر نشر صور ومشاهد العنف والدمار ودعم الأيقونات الفلسطينية، ما أدى إلى انتشار السردية على نطاق واسع وتقويتها وترسيخها وتحويلها إلى سردية مهيمنة إعلاميا وشبكيا متجاوزة جهود الإخماد الإسرائيلي الرقمي والسيبراني. وقد كان للفلسطينيين من داخل غزة في تشابكهم مع فلسطينيين الخارج دور في تغليب السردية الفلسطينية على حساب السردية الإسرائيلية. النتيجة الثالثة هو نقل الحرب من الواقع الرقمي الافتراضي للميدان الموقعي. عندما ضعف التأثير الشبكي للسردية الإسرائيلية تحولت الاستراتيجية إلى طمسها موقعيا عبر أعمال عنف مادية واستهداف ممنهج لمصادر الإعلام، بمعنى إبادة المنازل والإبادة الثقافية والسياسية والإعلامية. وقد اشتغل كثير من الباحثين على هذا الموضوع، ما جعل الجغرافيا المادية مساحة استراتيجية لإخفاء السردية الرقمية، أي أن تصفية تناقل الخبر وتحقيق قدرة الإنتاج الإعلامي الميداني عد وسيلة لإبادة الصور والمشاهد في الأمطار ومنع نشر انتهاكات الاحتلال. كيف استثمر الشبكيون وحركة المقاومة هذا الوضع؟ استثمر الناشطون الفلسطينيون وجمهور الشبكيين وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي لتوثيق الإبادة والفظاعات بصورة لحظية، تحولت المشاهد العفوية والمعاشة للمدنيين والشهداء والمشاهد الميدانية السردية الفلسطينية إلى قضية مركزية عالمية يتحلق حولها الفاعلون حول في مختلف أرجاء العالم. استخدم سكان غزة الشبكات أيضا أيضا لجمع الدعم والموارد، بينما تحولت أيقونات المقاومة ولقطات المواجهة إلى رموز انتشار جذبت تعاطف جيل شبكي عالمي يفضل السرد الفردي والعفوي والعاطفي على حساب الروايات الرسمية الباردة والجافة كما كان يقدمها الجيش الإسرائيلي. عفوا.
شكرا جزيلا لك دكتورة
Thank you
بشرى
very much, Dr. Bushra Zukar.
نعتذر إذا ما كانتش بعض
We
الفقرات
apologize
يعني مفهومة
if some
يعني
of the
بالصوت
some
بشكل
parts of your
واضح تماما.
intervention
شكرا
were
لك.
not very clear.
أخيرا
The
وليس
sound was
آخرا
not very clear.
السيد بلال دوفش لا أدري
Last
إذا
but
كان
not
موجودا أم
least,
لا
we'd like to give the floor to
وهو
Mr. Bilal
أهلا وسهلا
Dofij.
وهو محاضر في دائرة الإعلام بجامعة بير زيت في الضفة الغربية
He's
وقد
going
أعد
to be
هذه
with us
الورقة
from the West Bank.
بالتعاون مع الدكتور حمدي إشكاو
He prepared
والورقة
this paper
بعنوان
in
طمس
cooperation
السردية
with Dr. Hamdi
استراتيجيات
Ishkaw,
مضادة لتعزيز الأصوات
narrative
الفلسطينية في
annihilation,
الحرب على
counter
غزة.
strategies for
أستسمحكم
amplifying
فقط أنه هذه
Palestinian
ستكون آخر
voices
مداخلة
in the war
لن
on
يكون هناك
Gaza.
نقاش
So this is
لأن
going
لا
to be
معنى
the
لأي
last
نقاش في
intervention
ظل ما تعدد
with no discussion,
المداخلات
unfortunately.
وبعضها ليس واضحا تماما
So
واثنين فقط موجودين هنا.
we
إذن
have only
سنستمع
two
إلى هذه المداخلة
persons. We're going to
ثم
listen to
نذهب
this
إلى
intervention
الاستراحة.
and then we're going to take a
تفضل
break.
سيد بلال.
Mr. Bilal, the floor is yours.
شكرا لك واشكركم جميعا
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all for this opportunity. My paper was prepared in English in cooperation with Dr. Hamdi. Dr. Hamdi is going to prepare and present the paper in English.
السلام عليكم، هل تسمعوني؟ إذا الورقة كما
سيقوم الدكتور حمدي
So
باللغة الإنجليزية
this paper is what Dr. Bilal Dofish from Beir Zayt University and myself from Al University in Morocco worked on was specifically on narrative annihilation, which is specific strategies that are used by the Israelis and specific other strategies or counter strategies that are being utilized by the Palestinians to counter that strategy of manipulating, erasing the narrative of the Palestinians. So this specific paper started with numbers. So if we go into numbers, according to what we have read on a number of platforms, including Jazeera platform, is that more than 270 Palestinian journalists have been killed since October 7th. I'm saying more than 270. And then in terms of the Palestinian media reach, so it's going less and less, which meaning that less than 80%. And the opposite is that the Israeli media reach goes up to 100% in terms of reaching a wide, massive number of audiences, and that there is a number of strategies to control the international press from accessing to Gaza, as well as there is a continuous, systematic removal of all content from major platforms. So this brought us, both of us, Bilal and I, to question what are the ways that the Palestinian journalists are using in order to document, in order to counter this huge hegemonic control of the Palestinian narratives online and in the media in general. So we used two theories in order to understand this specific erasure of the Palestinian narrative. One is digital colonialism, which brings us back to the same blatant colonialism that is a colonialism of land, colonialism of resources, colonialism of course, narratives. But this one is more of digital one, which is online. The other one is digital imperialism. So this is the second theoretical framework, digital imperialism, that is mostly based on governance. So to what extent the international, mostly Western governance is controlling the narrative. So among what we found is that in the Meta and in more of the social media platforms, you find that there are Israeli former soldiers that are working in key positions. So their roles is to delete, erase the Palestinian voices, and also to picture and give a space for the Israeli perspective, which means that they control what gets shared, what gets received by us, by all of the masses, and what gets deleted, meaning that the Palestinian narrative gets deleted and the Israeli narrative gets shared. And in terms of the methodology, what we used a snowballing strategy that started with interviewing five key uh, journalists, activists. So if I'm giving you examples, so the first, there is a journalist, the document from a specific organization that is called Hamla, the documents, the digital rights violations, the fights, and all the specific fights for the restoration of accounts. So if a specific account gets deleted, so they work hard in order to regain that specific account and showcase the very specific institutional failures of struggles of Palestinians. This is one example. There is another female journalist that we have interviewed that is more of academic, that emphasizes that the censorship affects the Palestinians. So that's her role. And there's another journalist or content creator that specifically tailored his focus into the social media in order to amplify the Palestinian voices and showcase the restrictions. There is a field journalist that describes the daily strangers, and plus there is a female journalist that, or both a journalist and an activist that discuss the challenges of being woman in the field. And here, of course, we didn't access to Gaza, but we worked mainly on الضفة الغربية, and that's what West Bank, I mean, and that's what Bilal Dofish did. And these interviews have been conducted between June and August 2025. We used a grounded theory strategy in order to, of course, analyze these interviews. And what we found, and here I'm giving you findings. So we found the key category of the first one is that the pervasive digital censorship, meaning the use of specific algorithmic backlisting of specific platforms, meaning Palestinian platforms, Palestinian journalists, and a specific clear manual moderation of the bias, which is more of a double standard, which is that moderators' personal biases influence the decisions, meaning that there are specific voices that gets to be shared and other, meaning these rises, and other voices that gets to be deleted, and the alignment of corporate political organizations. And among this, what we found is that it used to be that TikTok, for example, was more of lenient, that it used to allow more voices of the Palestinian narrative, but probably now and from now on, specifically that Larry Ellison is going to control this platform. This is going to change. Whereas for the Meta, it's more of a total control and total erasing of the Palestinian narrative. So that's the first one. The second group of findings is that we found that there are clear physical threats, meaning like what journalists put it, I'm quoting here, opening quote, they want to create a space of impunity, closing of quote here, meaning that what they do is that whenever they target any specific Palestinian journalist on the field, there is no specific counter repercussions to that regarding to those violators, and controls, of course, self-censorship or controlling the narrative from the journalists themselves. Fragmented narrative, this is another reality that we found, that in the Palestinians, among the Palestinians, there is a fragmentation of the narrative. So there is no specific one body that helps in projecting one narrative. And I'm opening a quote here that one interviewee said, "We work as individuals. We don't tell the same story or the same narrative." Ending of quote. And finally, the Hasbara warfare, that the Israelis are well funding their propaganda campaigns and they're trying to project the Palestinian narrative as a Hollywood, or in terms of what they call as a Bollywood narrative that needs to be debunked. And that's what they do. They work hard on debunking that Palestinian narrative as being something that is a lie. Third key is the again here the total double standards of comparing this to the Ukrainian comparison. So the interviewees, they projected what happened with social media campaigns on the platforms when it comes to the Ukrainian narratives compared to the Palestinian narrative. That the Ukrainians, they allow all of these specific terms that can be considered as dangerous concepts, as what they claim, but they don't do the same with the Palestinians. And of course, the geographic and linguistic bias. So of course, this is very much dangerous. And this point that I mentioned, which is the policy of DIO, which is dangerous individuals and organizations, meaning that when you say a specific term, they claim and they kind of these meta organizations or these social platform organizations, including TikTok, sometimes they target you as using a term or a concept or a narrative that is very much dangerous, meaning that they claim you as an individual organization that is dangerous that needs to be stopped or deleted. Next, now this is our focus is that we worked very much hard on eliciting and bringing to share in our paper what are the strategies that Palestinians use in order to amplify their perspective. What are the strategies that they use in order to mainly give a space to their narrative to counter this hegemonic control, digital colonialism and digital imperialism. So number one is linguistic adaptation. So when I say linguistic adaptation, and what we found, Bilal and I, is that they use specific clear strategies in order to evade the deletion, meaning that if there is a specific term that can be easily deleted, they kind of cut it. So they use this specific coded language in order to put specific spaces between words, specific symbols that are being added in order to leave or make sure that this word can bypass the AI control and the manual bias somehow. And example of that is, this is in Arabic. So instead of using, for example, ustushhida, they use the term irtaqa. Instead of using Hamas, they use the word al-akhdar. And of course, you know that sometimes they use certain emojis, like using a watermelon. So these are amongst the strategies that Palestinian journalists, reporters, and activists use in order to make sure that they bypass these filters that are very much, very clearly trained filters using AI and using manual bias to control the narrative. The second thing that we focused on eliciting from these interviews is what we found as platform diversification. And this means that instead of using one specific platform, let's say Instagram, as being very much too dangerous, so then they use into using other platforms like Telegram, or they use Signal, or they use different platforms. And this meaning is to make sure they escape this restrictiveness of platforms like YouTube. So, or for example, use specific shorts or using reels or using short formats and these specific ways in order to make sure that they maintain a long lifeline of sharing the Palestinian narrative. Why that is important is because it means that no specific takedown, if it's being taken down from TikTok, at least it's available for some time on Facebook, for example. And if not, if it's being taken down from Facebook, then it's able to be resistant and uh, last long on Signal, and so on and so forth. The other technique and strategy that is being used by the Palestinians is that they call is organized documentation, or arshafa, which is that organizations like Hamla, or they are systematically documenting every censorship, every case. They try to make sure that they maintain that every specific violation is being archived, is being used as data against the system. And they create specific pressures to helpfully create specific change. Number four is that this might be the most powerful technique that they use, which is the human storytelling. So they go and they provide specific stories of people in, of course, of violations that happen in clear, very far areas, or mainly humanistic, that can be shared with the audience, and that can have a specific impact. So this means that instead of using statistics, they use clear individual stories, personal stories that cannot be flagged as political, that cannot be flagged as DIO, dangerous individual or organizations, and they connect with the people. And this, we believe, is what made specifically the US mass or number of US key podcasters change their perspective to what is happening in Gaza and in Palestine, and making sure that this is what reached a massive number of young people in the United States mostly, and of course in the Western world. So, for example, one of the interviews, they told us that a story of one specific farmer who was attacked by Israeli settlers and they stole all of his sheep. They told that this focus on this key matter is one of the things that really made sure that it can connect with the audience, especially that this specific story focused on that matter, that the son of this specific farmer wasn't able to get married because of the losing of all of the savings. So these are the key
آخر
strategies.
دقيقة دكتور حمدي، آخر دقيقة. Last minute,
Yes,
please.
so I'm reaching the conclusion here. So what we found is that the combination of the digital colonialism, digital imperialism has really showed a clear erasure of the narrative of the Palestinians. But this doesn't mean that it stops here. But Palestinians, as activists, journalists, and reporters, they work really very much hard in order to make sure that they transmit their narrative to the world. And I will end here with one quote from Rifat al-Ar'ir, who was a Palestinian poet that was killed, who said that if I must die, you must at least live to tell my story. And hopefully this is what we've done in this paper, and this is what we're hopefully hoping to share in this conference, and that the conference is also doing. So I've repeated again, if I must die, as what Rifat al-Ar'ir said, if I must die, you must live to tell my story. And thank you very much for allowing us to share this paper with you.
شكرا لك دكتور
Thank
حمدي
you very
إشكاو.
much, Dr.
بهذا
Hamdi
نصل إلى
Eshko.
نهاية
We
هذه
have come
الجلسة
to the end
الرابعة.
of this fourth session.
الجلسة الخامسة ستكون بعد
The fifth
استراحة
session
حالية
is going to start after a break,
بعنوان الشبكات
and it
الاجتماعية
is going to be
واستراتيجيات إنتاج المحتوى خلال
entitled The
الحرب.
Social.
وستدير الجلسة الدكتورة فاطمة السمادي الباحث الأول بمركز
So
الجزيرة
the session is going
للدراسات.
to
شكرا
be
لك.
social media networks and content production strategies during the war, moderated by Fatima Smadi. Thank you so much.